Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Hello, thanks for joining us. Today, we are chatting all about how to turn your personal network into your professional superpower. We wrote an article on it a few weeks ago in one of our newsletters, and it got some really good traction, and we're doubling down on it today in our chats.
Yeah, I feel like, this was such a big light bulb moment for me over in the US, is that we are socialized. I believe a lot of the stuff is socialization rather than innate, but women are socialized to be relational. And yet we have this big blocker between our personal friendships and how we interact with people at work. And I just find that really fascinating as a social norm.
It's only been, maybe our generation, maybe halfway through to the last one, where career was a priority. So if it's never been taught as a priority where you had choice and it was, you were the breadwinner and there was expectations and success all wrapped up in career, I suppose it's just not something we prioritize with friends groups.
I don't know. I wonder if it's also, I'm just thinking about different topics, like men tend to talk about cars more than women, and finance, coming from finance. So I just wonder if there's this, I don't know, I always think a conspiracy, but is there a reason why we tend to avoid it? And that is, aimed at keeping us apart? Or is it that we have been socialized to believe there's only a small number of spaces at the top for women? And so we've got this feeling that sharing and collaboration, we haven't been told that that's a path to the top, that we actually have to sort of try and protect our turf, or I don't know what it is, but yeah. To me, I just was like, that is one of the biggest light bulb moments for me, was that we absolutely, and I've asked a ton of people now, that we have this clear line between work and friends, and we do talk about work with our friends, but often it's to vent or moan about a terrible boss or a person we're not getting along with at work. It's not constructive and it's not finding opportunities. It's just for those kind of complain sessions, which, I just found it really fascinating. And I hope we can change that, because it is, I think, that professional superpower is probably not understating the benefits of being able to make this transformation.
Well, we've got some tips at the very end of today's podcast on how we can change it. But we're going to chat about peer network today, life connections, how exactly do you turn a personal contact into a professional superpower. I had a light bulb moment also this week. We did our graduation session as part of one of our power session cohorts, and someone just said, I thought networking was just this really surface salesy thing, but really coming out of this power session, I've realized, I've had an aha moment, that it is around building authentic and honest relationships, which I thought, amazing. Because we're relational and we do tend to have deep and relationships around us where we share all sorts of things. One might say we share more details in certain aspects of our lives than men might. That is actually networking, and that for women, and that's okay. And actually having fewer but deeper networks around us is equally as powerful as having lots of shallower ones.
I agree. And it's different people have different styles. Like, I think if you look around it, even in my friend group, there's people who have 5 different groups of friends and they go out and do different things with different groups. I have friends who have 3 really close friends and they rely heavily on them. And we all have different ways that we like to get value out of connections. So do what works for you. If we transform how we think about networking to be genuine connections with great people who you can share experiences and perspectives and help each other, give each other a hand up, it kind of feels like a different story.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things I've learned from these power sessions is that many women felt quite alone and they feel quite isolated. We also had a great conversation with someone this morning about her career and feeling quite alone through these bumps that we all encounter in our careers. And if anything, we have kind of forced networking as part of power sessions, and people have this, oh my goodness, I'm not alone in feeling this way, or I'm not alone with dealing with this. And not only can we support each other, to your point, but it's really just to know that you're not alone is so important.
Yeah, and there's a million different points along our careers where we're having to make decisions, big decisions that have wildly large ramifications. So we were talking this morning about that very first job, and especially if you're in a relationship and you are weighing up one person's job against another. There's the what happens if your partner earns a lot more money or has an opportunity to. Do you take a step back in your career? What if they're working overseas or get an opportunity overseas? Do you follow them? How do you return to work from having children? When you're made redundant, how do you jump at the first job? What happens if you have kids and you're a single mum? There's all these tiny moments that are actually huge in each of our lives, but we go through them independently and don't realize that we're surrounded by other people who've come up against that exact same challenge and have made decisions and have learnt a lot from them. So it's just all hidden, and we just think we are the only ones doing it.
Yeah. And often if we're lucky enough, we might go to a partner and chat through that, or we might go through our parents, but they'll have a perspective. What about other women that are navigating careers and that have big visions or ambitions for what that looks like for them and how to build it on their own terms, and not having those networks or those peers around you to help guide, help challenge, help support, help you make those decisions can be really detrimental.
I agree. And I feel like plug for the single ladies, because that came out of our conversation this morning. We talk a lot about how hard parenting is, and it is hard. But what we never really talk about as society is how hard it is, and the tax on being a single person. And I've been thinking about it over the last week or so. My girlfriend's about to move in, and just the level of mental load that I have carried for 20 years of being an adult, of setting up a house, having to know all my finances, having to understand all the insurance, car decision making, every single decision I have to make outside of work, I've had to make and take responsibility. There's no one to share the load with. And I think that as well, if you're a single lady navigating your career, the decisions you have to make around supporting, if you lose your job, there's no secondary income stream. So all of that sort of stuff, you're just surrounded by people who are going through the same thing, and they are genuine challenges. And we often can minimize the challenges that we have because we think we're whiny or complainy when we bring them up, but they're actual tangible problems that we have to get over. And the more you can talk about them, the more value you get.
And it's okay for it to be in a structured and a deliberate way, which is what we'll chat about today, including a few options. But one of the big whys I was thinking about this morning as to why we should turn some of these personal networks and is that we know the world operates on trust, and we know the world still operates on who you know. And so we should be leveraging that as well. The easiest connections and recommendations that you make are on behalf of the people that you know and trust. And quite often, they're your friends.
I think it's know, trust, and like them. And we see it in startup world a lot, where people get the gang back together and they go and do something else because you've got learnt ways of working and learnt how to trust each other. And we get all of that through friendship. When you think about the friend who you would be trust completely with organizing the next trip, or the friend you go to when you need clear, calm advice, like these are hugely transferable workplace skills that we are learning and testing as friends.
Yeah. And you know what's so funny was when you were chatting about that, it's this weird double-edged sword, because it's exactly why we see this meritocracy of boards of middle-aged white men on boards, because they just tap the last middle-aged white male that they worked with on the previous board, because that completely de-risks the risk on that board, which is a risky thing sitting in governance. And so they know that they worked with a person before, they like the person, that person's probably going to agree with a lot of their perspectives or point of views, or they just trust them in their expertise. And so it's this weird double-edged sword, is that we are chatting about diverse perspectives, but it's almost like we have to right the balance by banding together and lifting each other up.
Well, and I feel like a lot of our friends are diverse, but also I think that's such a great solution to that meritocracy is if you are a woman in a position where you can bring other people into the situation, you actually have the power to look outside professional connections and look to your friends. And the example that really triggered this for me was a venture capitalist in the US who was raising money for a fund and raised it from literally everyone else apart from her highly successful, highly ambitious friends, and then had this light bulb moment thinking, why did I not go to the lowest hanging fruit, the people I like and trust the most, and instead went to a whole bunch of men who I didn't really know?
Should we chat about peer network? I think that's the easiest way for us to turn our personal connections into professional superpower. And we know this because we spent 6 months in research. We interviewed 50 to 100 incredible women, and we asked a number of them, actually all of them, can you point to a couple things that really helped you on your career journey? Now, there were a few, but one of the common themes throughout was they had a peer network. And what that meant was it was generally between 7 and 9 people. They would meet anywhere from, some would do bi-weekly, others would do monthly, but some of these groups had been going for 20 years and they'd seen, and things did change, that some of the group morphed or changed, or maybe one left, one joined. But the constant was that they had supported one another through all those critical little micro decisions that you make in your career. Usually take it on yourself. This group supported one another in those micro decisions, which we know can have exponential effects in your position where you'd like to be, in the outcome of your career, in your net worth, and getting what you're worth in the marketplace. And so who would you build your peer network with?
I base it on work connection, really. So I think when I think naturally what happens with different friends, I have one who's in cycling behavior change, transport behavior change, very different from tech and startup to a degree, but huge amounts of commonalities around behavior change, around mass movements, around the challenges of bringing stakeholders along. And so we talk a lot. We used to go out for runs quite regularly and talk a lot about how we both navigated those situations. So she would be absolutely someone who I would see, and she's a very good high school friend. So,
yeah.
However, other high school friends have very different levels of ambition or interest in their work, or work just in such different areas that there's very little crossover. Then I have friends who I've met as an adult, who I've met purely as friends, who are huge mentors and have incredible experience again in adjacent areas. So I learn, I've got a great friend who's a people and experience person, and I just have had so much help and support and understanding of all the stuff she knows. And then same with a friend who works in government but on larger mass campaigns for the government, so understanding all the sort of nuance on that and how different agencies are brought in and all that sort of stuff I find really fascinating. So, and then I've met people through work, and I've just gone, you and I have we just connect at a work level. So I kind of just go, all of those people, there's some sort of level of chemistry there, and they don't have to be my best friends, but they also don't not have to be my best friend.
I think I have used a bit of a LinkedIn overlay, that idea of first and second connections. The group that I got together with when I first moved to New Zealand was a really interesting stage in life. I was home with my kids, struggling with even just getting to know people and having a human connection. And so those are the friends that came in and filled that stage. So as a result, it is really kid dominated in terms of human connections. And
Can I ask though on that, because we are talking about turning your personal network into a professional network.
Yeah.
Are there any people in that group that if you were to actually sort of hone in, you might have a lot more in common about work than you realize? And that's to me, that's exactly the task we're trying to get today. How do you transform that?
There's a second connection, and I know it already. I know.
So you wouldn't take any of those people?
No.
There's no connection at all for work?
There might be, but it's this weird, and I did chat with someone else in my, that I was in a coaching session with last week, and we shared real similarities. It's protecting that is kid talk. And there's a thing about protecting that is that time and space in our lives. However, there is a larger group at hand, which I would consider second connections, incredible women, and that's where the work chemistry has come in. And so there's absolutely those second connections where I'm I don't think it'll be disrupt the vibe of that first connection. I don't know. It is just an innate feeling I have, and I absolutely can already think of a couple second connections.
So those first ones, I'm gonna go back to the first ones because this is exactly the challenge we're trying to do, right? Is do you only ever meet as a group, or
Yes.
do you have one-on-one connections with some of them?
We only ever meet as a group, as just women, and
okay.
then there is that, and then the only other time we meet is as couples. So we're couple friends.
Oh, okay.
Right?
And so you don't see any opportunity to break through that and identify maybe one person and go, I actually think we could connect on a work level, and I'd like to expand that conversation.
It is a good challenge because there is a friend in that first connection group that is just really leaning back into her career after her children. All of her children now are leaving home. So there is someone that I think there might be something there. So it is a great challenge, and I'll think on it.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that at action time.
But I am excited about the second connection because I think there's an obvious chemistry. And weirdly, when we get together, we talk about work. We do a little bit of kids thing, but we talk about work. Whereas the first connection group, we don't, other than the complaining and the like the good stuff that you need to vent. So I think there is a chemistry as it relates to career with a couple of the second connections. And then I kind of am like, well, if we can just get together, could they just ask one of their connections? And then I'm actually quite open to getting in a room of women where I might only know 2 of them and I might not know 6 of them, but I still consider that my personal network. Like I got that, we get that group together through our personal networks.
No. I completely agree. I think whatever works for different people works for different people. And
we're going to give it a go.
But I think there is just this I was just thinking about the, when you get together, you talk about work, because I was thinking about how I do it and thinking about this podcast.
Yeah.
And even just a friend on Friday night. So I went out for, this is how my life works. Went out for drinks on Friday night with a really good friend of mine, one of my closest friends, and we hadn't seen each other for a week or so. We like to hang out quite a lot. So we went out, and then my girlfriend turned up. So she just started day 2 of another job. And then my really good friend John turned up, who we met kind of through work, but then have kind of formed our own friendship. And then he'd invited this other woman, Emily, along, who I've sort of met 1 or 2 times. So we ended up having this group of 5 people who kind of vaguely know each other, 1 or 2 connections in common. And what I find fascinating about those conversations is that we float in and out of work and into social life, into challenges. And that is my joy. Like, I love those conversations. But I wonder with that is one of the key elements of building a peer network is not thinking of it as a group, but as individuals that you pull into a group. So in my close high school friends, there might be 1 or 2 that I would talk to about work. But that means in that group situation, we wouldn't, but we would form a different group.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wonder when, like, because I think a lot of us are in a similar situation to you, and that you've got these groups where you meet as a group and you talk about, you have a group culture, which is absolutely true. And it's really, I feel like that would be impossible to sort of go, hey guys, let's all. However, in each of those groups, there's probably 1 or 2 people
I
that
agree.
you're like, yeah. And then you form these really weird, and sometimes they stick and sometimes they don't.
Yes.
Like, that group, it'll be interesting to see if that becomes a thing.
Yeah.
And I've done it before with where you have one night and then you're like, oh, these 2 connections kind of worked, but this one didn't. And that to me is like the joy of life, and how I end up making very interesting, weird friendships with people.
Yeah. With respect to life connections, I love that. What is it called? Serendipity or something? When you'll be chatting and you have it, let's just say
chemistry. It's
yeah.
like chemistry.
And let's say 80% of the time you don't, right? Which is why I think a lot of networking events are yuck, because you are searching for chemistry. And when you find it, I mean, I know when you find it next, I look over and you're like going deep. You are going deep with someone, and I'm like, you've exchanged life stories by the end of this thing. But it is true. That's what we are searching for, is a connection. And I do love it when you go to on the sidelines of a sports thing or at a school thing or the dog park. Oh my gosh, let me tell you.
Good place to find work connections and boyfriends, I've heard.
The dog park is the best. Is it the new like golf course or something? I don't know. But I love it. And I was chatting with a neighbor who knew we were doing something in this space, and then he said, you must meet this person, and we've met this person as a result now. Joe Constantini's doing incredible things. But I do love those little serendipitous moments where you're just open to the universe, using a woo-woo term, where you are going, it's not selfish. It's not selfish to kind of say, what are you up to? And this is what I'm up to. And to start to normalize those conversations. Yeah. It's what guys are doing.
Well, I think so. And I think it's funny because we often analyze each other's approach, because we are quite different when it comes to Kristen. And we've talked about the fluttering, which probably, I don't mean that in an offensive way, because I actually admire it and I can't do it, because I look at that and I just go, I'm exhausted just looking at it. But I feel like you are very good at, and I remember we went to a 50th birthday a while ago, and this exemplifies Kristen's approach. It was our friend Rebecca, and it was a wonderful party, and Kristen probably turned up a bit before me, and I did my usual. I had a couple of good friends there, so I was just hanging out with them, and Kristen circumnavigated the entire party, and then in classic Kristen style left at about 10:30 to go home so that she could walk her dog.
I was exhausted by then.
I at that point had quite a few drinks, and every single person I met from there on in was like, oh my god, Nat, you're with Kristen, let me talk about Powrsuit. And I was like, oh no, I'm like having my wines, having my chats in this party. And I thought, oh, it's both approaches work, that I am less likely to talk to people directly about Powrsuit on meeting. I met someone selling a car in the weekend. We're now a 1-car household. We got deep on Gallipoli, on losing a child, an adult child, in the first 10 minutes of meeting. Don't ask me how.
Yeah, wow.
And then sometimes those conversations roll. Like, that's my approach. And because I think for me, I'm like, oh, maybe I will, like, I want to like you as a friend to work with you. I think that's what I've realized about me. If I love you as a friend, I want to work with you. And so I think for me, finding a friendship is really important. I don't know. I'm just thinking about this on the fly.
Well,
this is like therapy.
If we were to psychoanalyze myself, there would be a small cultural factor, and that's a very North American thing. Is the first question you ask is, what do you do? But equally, I have always found that my identity is wrapped up in my work. Which is why I'm led to really interesting purpose-led visions and missions, because I think it's okay for me to live and breathe my work and that be a big part of me. Yeah.
I think the way you do it, like, you elevator pitch that, you know, like, it's amazing, and people love it and they get so much energy from it.
Because imagine me chatting about pop culture or like other stuff. Like I can go the kid, like, I've got a few cards to play, but I'm a little bit of a boring person. Like, I love the news. Am I going to sit and talk about the conflict between Israel and Palestine now?
She does.
Like, no one wants to talk about that right now. I want to talk about it. No
one.
You know
what I keep hearing about NOS now, that nitrous. And I was like, this is when Kristen talks about the news.
It's a new drug.
I'm like, oh no, now I see it everywhere.
Yeah. So I realized that, you know, the don't talk about like religion, politics, and whatever else. I'm like, those are all. I'm like, it's
my first question at the moment is, who are you voting for?
Yeah, look,
I want to crowdsource my vote.
I think that's okay, but
hashtag vote everyone. By the way,
I know that I'm like no-go zone with half the stuff I want to talk about, so I just stick to what I know. I don't know. Something that is shared between the both of us is we are open and we are curious and we genuinely want to find some chemistry. Yeah. And that's all it takes.
And the way we do it is different because we, as all people are, care about slightly different things, and that's the magic of those connections.
So this is the approach. And I had written also personal board of directors, but I don't think we need to talk about it.
Well, this is just one element of it, right? Your peer group, these people who your sounding boards are part of, and we can link to that.
I will link to the reference, but this is actually about you getting incredible people around you to help you navigate big decisions in your career.
And small decisions, which often are big. Like we were talking this morning. Some of those things that feel quite small, like I need to get a job, so I'll go for the first job that is offered.
Yes.
Feels like a small decision. It feels logical. However, huge ramifications. Yeah. So
we
really
should have
just
both.
Having those conversations and normalizing them is really useful.
We should have both. We should have both. We should have a peer group, and we should have a personal board of directors, and we should navigate the sidelines with curiosity.
Yeah.
But then isn't it the worst when you get into conversations with people and they don't ask you anything back?
Well, I was actually thinking it's funny because I think I don't I just don't have those conversations. I did a lot of internet dating, so I've practiced this of like, when I say a lot, I went out on 15 dates, and after the first 5 where I won them and came home being like, I was spectacular, I was so interesting, they loved me, and then I was like, oh, but they were really boring and didn't ask me anything, that I just stopped. I would ask 2 questions, and if there was no question coming back, I would sit there silently until they asked, and I do the same with work. I'm like, that's chemistry to me. If you don't have anything to ask me, we have no chemistry. And I don't mean ask like, hello, Kristen, how's the weather? You ask me. Sometimes it's those things where someone will be like, oh my God, yes, and I did that. And so the conversation flows. Like, if you don't have that, I will die in a conversation over time.
Yeah. But, and you can sense the people that have been fawned over their entire lives that don't ask you about yourself. I mean, you can just see that. I don't know.
Although I've got to say, the reason I became friends with very successful entrepreneur in New Zealand is we were at, I think, a networking session or an event, and the topic of microfinancing came up, and he made a grand claim, and I love microfinancing, the idea of giving small amounts of money to people to help get them economically empowered in countries that are underdeveloped, or those situations. I had read a book on it, and so I just called him out, and I was like, you're wrong for all these reasons. And he turned around and went, that is spectacular. He told that story quite a few times afterwards, that he could meet someone at a, like, who was happy going there with him rather than sort of pandering to him.
You're not afraid of challenges. I also recall another situation where we had to get into Harry and Meghan, and I was like, uh-oh, here we go. There was like, someone made a bold claim on Harry and Meghan, and Nat just stopped it, and we're trying to sell this person on Powrsuit.
I was like, stop that for a moment.
And you're like, I'm just going to stop this conversation for a minute. I was like, oh God, here we go. Anyway.
We'll do our next episode on Harry and Meghan
for
anyone who wants to join that conversation. But yes, how over the next month, I love the idea of setting a challenge, because I was literally talking about this yesterday.
Yeah,
so this is easy for me to know.
I think independently we should go and form and meet once with a peer group. We don't have to look at this as a long-term future thing, but we need to go and use our respective methods, whatever they are, and form a group of 7 to 9 people in the next month and report back in a month's time on how it went.
Great.
And some tips for others that want to join us is to just start professional conversations to test. That is a tip. You might find some chemistry there. You could put a call out on LinkedIn. You could ask some of your friend groups, first or second connections, or other friend groups. I really
like the idea, to your point about a group that you might know 2 people and not know 6. I really like that, because I think that's where some of this.
Well, and the onus isn't all on me too to get.
Well, yes, and that makes it really easy. So if we boil it down to a Powrsuit tiny action, think of 1 to 2 people in your network, and it could be someone you've worked with before. It could be someone you're working with now. Personally, I'm kind of against the working with now, because you want to be able to grapple with stuff and probably talk about, I don't know, if you're working in a particular culture.
Unless it's really removed.
Yeah. So someone you've worked with, a friend from high school, a friend from university, a friend from a mum's group, someone you met at the dog park yesterday, whatever it is. Just think of 1 to 2 that you think, interesting. I think that they would like to have a conversation with them about work. And then ask each of them to invite 1 more person along.
Exactly.
Done. That's 6 to 7 to 9, whatever the number is, people sorted.
Now, to make it easy, I'm probably just going to host at mine, and I will probably put on a bottle of wine and some beer and some snacks.
She always under what's the word? Under caters for the wine. 1 bottle of wine. It's really going to scrape the sides.
But I have great beers. And then we have suggested an agenda. Someone will get 5 minutes to share what is going on, and maybe an ask at the end of that. And then the whole group will have a time to go, here's what worked for me. Here's what I'm hearing. Have you tried this? Questioning, that kind of thing. And then move to the next person. And you should, if you've got between roughly, 6 to 9 people, you should have time kind of for everyone within 90 minutes.
I actually have done this before recently, and we've fallen out of, there was only 3 of us, and the problem with
actually 3, a bar's great. I can think of some great bars to do that
and
in.
I think, well, for us it was just not neutral territory, but like neutral between all our locations. We all had to travel the same distance.
Amazing.
But 3 is too small, and the reason 3 is too small is if one of you can't make it, you're now just having a catch up with a friend. So you actually do need to have a few extras, because we met twice and it was really powerful, and then we haven't been able to make it happen since. So
fair. Okay, well, I think it feels as though people are quite busy, so we've given kind of that 2 to 3 weeks to start to give people a heads up and lock in a date. I don't know, maybe early November, which means that we should be able to report back on the 8th of November podcast.
Great.
Amazing. Please let us know if you're joining us in this experiment, or just wait to hear on the 8th of November, where we can tell you and we can share what worked and what didn't work and how great it was. And we'll go from there.
As shameless, what's the word? Shameless affirmation people.
Yeah.
I had a message on Instagram yesterday, and someone had said they'd sent out a link to Powrsuit to their work network, and people were like, oh yeah, that's the one I've been telling you about. Tell us if you love what we do, or what you or if you have any suggestions, because conversations are happening about us behind our backs.
Oh.
And for us, it's actually really funny
Our
that
ears
we
are
live
burning.
in a bit of a feedback drought, that you hear from some amazing people who's sending stuff through, but it's probably a couple of times a week, and we'd love to hear. We know there's a bunch of people listening. We just don't know who you are and what you care about. So don't be afraid to send us an email or a message, because it literally is just two of us. And I know there's something really weird about having a podcast that makes you seem famous, but it's just two of us.
Yeah, we're just talking to we don't know who.
In my spare room.
Yeah. Give us a hello. And also, while you're doing that, would you hit follow and give us 5 stars? Because then it means we get more listeners, which means we're going to start to get some really cool guests on the podcast. Little hint there for future podcasts. So please give us a bit of a love and drop us a line to let us know how we're doing, and if you're going to join in on the experiment or other great things that you want to share. And we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.